Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a stack of documents that, frankly, reads like the outline for a political thriller, but it is very much real. We are digging into a file labeled Operation Caracas.
Yeah.
And I have to say, usually when we look at cities that define the global order, we're talking about places that project power, right?
Yeah.
Washington, Beijing, London.
Places where if a pin drops, the whole world hears it.
Exactly.
Or you have the symbolic ones, Jerusalem, Rome, cities that matter because of what they represent. But today, we're looking at a city that mattered for a completely different and honestly a much darker reason.
And the source material puts it so bluntly, it mattered because something went very wrong there.
It's such a hook.
It is. And right off the bat, I think we need to clarify what we're doing here. Because usually when people hear covert operation, especially in a place like Venezuela, they want the TikTok.
Minute by minute, yeah. The gear, the explosions, the Bravo 6 going dark stuff.
And we are not doing that. This isn't a movie script. The source material we have is asking a much more fundamental and, I think, unsettling question. It isn't asking how it happened. It's asking, why Caracas?
And that sounds like a geography question, but it's not.
No, the more I read, the more I realized it's a psychological one.
It's deeply psychological. It's about risk tolerance. It's about timing. And ultimately, it's about how power behaves when it thinks no one is really watching.
So our mission today is to reverse engineer that decision, to get inside the heads of the planners who looked at a map and said, there, that's the spot.
Because it just doesn't make sense on paper.
Not at all. I mean, you look at Caracas in the time frame these documents cover, and it doesn't look like a tactical playground. It looks like a logistical nightmare.
An absolute nightmare. I mean, let's be clear. It's not a financial hub like New York. It's not a military command capital. It has no major alliance headquarters. It's a huge city in a hostile country.
By any conventional logic, this should have been the last place you'd choose.
The absolute last place.
You'd think you'd want a quiet border town or maybe somewhere with a friendly government next door, but no, they chose the capital. And that decision is where we have to start, because the source introduces a concept here that is just crucial.
Constraints.
Exactly, constraints. The source says large-scale covert actions don't begin with targets, they begin with constraints.
And this is a huge misconception people have. They think planners have a blank check, that they sit around a table and go, who do we want to go after today?
A Hollywood version.
That's the Hollywood version. In reality, it's a windowless room, and they're asking, what are we actually allowed to do? What access do we have? And, the big one, what happens if this leaks?
The dreaded oops factor.
Precisely, the oops factor. If this goes sideways, does it start a war? Does our government fall? And that's where the specific condition of Caracas at the time becomes, it becomes the feature, not the bug.
Right. The source describes it as sitting in this very specific intersection. It was politically unstable, internationally isolated,
and domestically fragmented. But here's the nuance that I found so interesting. It wasn't total anarchy.
No. The source says it was not chaotic enough to collapse, but not stable enough to resist pressure.
That is the sweet spot. Think about it. On one end, you have total chaos like Mogadishu in the early 90s. That's actually a terrible place for a sophisticated op.
Yeah.
Too unpredictable.
You can't rely on anything. The roads, the power, nothing.
Exactly. And on the other end, you've got a fortress state, a police state like North Korea. You can't get in without being spotted instantly.
Sure.
But Venezuela has settled into this middle ground of dysfunction. It was broken enough that the security services were distracted and corruptible, but functional enough that the lights mostly worked and you could rent a safe house.
So the dysfunction wasn't an accident to the planners, it was a requirement. They needed a system that was rotting from the inside, because rot creates holes you can crawl through.
That's a great way to put it. It's almost predatory. You're looking for an immune system that's too weak to fight off an infection, but, just strong enough to keep the host alive.
That's a vivid image. And it leads us to the next big theme in these documents, isolation. Because it's not just the internal state of the city, it's how the rest of the world sees it.
Oh, isolation is huge here. The source points out that by the time this was all being planned, Venezuela had kind of slipped out of the global spotlight.
Yeah, I remember that. It was on the news every night for a while, and then it just wasn't. The story had gone stale.
And in the world of covert ops, stale is gold. Because isolation narrows the audience. When a country is a pariah or just isolated for a long time, who leaves first? The international press.
Fewer journalists on the ground.
Exactly. Then the diplomats get pulled back or expelled. So you have fewer professionals asking uncomfortable questions, and you have fewer allies willing to escalate things over just another incident.
So the boredom of the international community actually provides cover.
It does. And the source uses a specific term for this, and I love this phrase: a low signal environment.
Oh, I circled that too. Let's define that.
Yeah.
Because obviously satellites still work over Caracas. People have smartphones. It's not like the city is, invisible.
No, it's not technically invisible. It's politically invisible. A low signal environment is a place where events can happen without immediately setting off global alarms. It's about the threshold for crisis.
It's like if a bomb goes off in, say, Zurich, it's front page news for weeks, the stock market dips.
Exactly, because it disrupts the expected order. But if something weird happens in a city that's already struggling, a city that deals with blackouts and protests and high crime every day,
It's just Tuesday.
it's just Tuesday. That's the core of it. The
Yeah.
source says tolerance is often all an operation needs. You don't need to be invisible. You just need to be ignored.
That is chillingly pragmatic. It's like you're exploiting the world's compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the physical reality. The where isn't just political, it's physical. And the source describes Caracas as a landscape of contradictions.
It really is. It's coastal, but not fully exposed because of the mountains. It's dense, but control is uneven. You have modern infrastructure sitting right next to logistical decay.
And that mix creates operational blind spots.
Right. Think about airspace. The source says airspace is monitored, they have radar, but enforcement is the issue.
Meaning they see you, but they might not scramble the jets.
Or they don't have fuel for the jets. Or the guy watching the radar hasn't been paid in 3 months, so he's watching a movie. Or the radar only works intermittently. The hardware is there, but the system around it is compromised.
I see. Same with the ports, I assume.
Exactly. Active but compromised. Security forces exist, but their loyalty is flexible.
So usually you'd look at that and say, that's a mess, that's dangerous. But the planner saw it differently.
They didn't see weakness. They saw ambiguity. And this is a key concept in the file. Yes. Ambiguity is where control hides. The source makes a great comparison. In a secure city, say in Europe, a convoy of black SUVs speeding through a red light is suspicious. People notice.
You stick out like a sore thumb.
Right. And in a total failed state, a war zone, movement is also noticed because everyone's on edge. Anything that moves is a threat.
But in a semi-functional system like Caracas,
It becomes noise. Is that a covert ops team? Or is it a drug cartel? Or a government minister late for lunch?
then noise is cover.
Noise is cover. Ambiguity creates hesitation. And in that moment of hesitation, when the local cop thinks, is it worth my job to pull them over? The operation is already gone.
Okay, so we have the political isolation, we have the physical ambiguity, but I want to pivot to the risk. Because even with all that cover, things can still go wrong.
Always. Murphy's Law applies everywhere.
And the source talks about the calculus of consequences. This idea that the planners weren't asking, can we do this? They were asking, can we absorb the consequences?
This is the cold, hard math of statecraft. Every covert action has a price tag if it gets exposed. But the thing about Caracas is that the price was already discounted.
What do you mean by discounted?
Politically cheaper. Imagine the operation is exposed. It's a disaster. What does the outrage look like? Another condemnation from the UN? Another emergency meeting?
The source says those were already priced in.
Exactly. The world was already condemning the government.
Yeah.
Relationships were already broken. So launching an operation there didn't require inventing a new crisis. It just blended into the existing one.
And the source says, escalation is dangerous, but repetition is manageable.
Think about it. If you do this in a friendly or neutral country, you cause a diplomatic rupture. That's escalation. But if you do it in a country you're already at odds with, it's just more of the same. It's repetition.
Yeah.
And bureaucracies are much more comfortable with repetition than new problems.
Wow, it just treats sovereignty like a variable in an equation, doesn't it?
Completely. It is a utilitarian calculation. Can we afford the bad press? In this case, the answer was yes, because the press was already bad.
But there's still a nagging question for me. Why not somewhere else?
The offshore argument, right?
Yeah. Why not a proxy state? Why not international waters? Why go into the city at all?
Because usually the answer comes down to trade-offs. Those other options, they probably existed on paper, but they have their own problems. International waters are hard to operate in. You have to trust a proxy security services not to leak.
And leaks are the enemy.
Leaks are the enemy. But Caracas offered something they needed, proximity and access. And if you're willing to take the high exposure that comes with that, it implies one factor was overriding everything else.
Urgency.
Urgency. This brings us to the time factor. The source is very clear. Operations rarely move forward when time is abundant. They move forward when time is running out.
So they didn't have the luxury of setting up some perfect, deniable trap in the middle of the ocean.
It sounds like they didn't. Deadlines, whether they're political, strategic, whatever, they drive these decisions. The source says, the perfect option that arrives too late is not an option.
That's a life lesson right there.
It is. Available now beats perfect later almost every time. Caracas wasn't perfect. It was messy, but it was available.
So urgency is driving them into this risky environment. And this leads to what I think is the most dangerous part of the whole mindset. The source calls it the illusion of control.
Yes. This is where things usually fall apart. This is the trap.
Right, because we said planners like the dysfunction. But the source says there's a danger there. Planners assume chaos is easier to manage than order.
And that is so rarely true. Chaos is, by definition, unmanageable. But there's a specific nuance here. The text says Caracas looked chaotic from the outside, but internally. The systems were rigid. They were centralized.
It wasn't just a free-for-all. There was a structure there. Loyalist militias, intelligence networks.
And that creates a false sense of controllability. You look at it from a briefing binder and think, okay, I can manipulate this lever. I can bribe this official. You start to believe you have mastered the environment.
The source calls it seductive. It feels like mastery right up until the moment it collapses.
That's the hubris of the planner. You think because you've identified the variables, you control them. But in a city like that, the variables are alive. They react. And that confidence is often what leads to disaster.
And that brings us to, I think, the darkest question in the entire source file. It really stops you in your tracks.
I know the one you mean.
The text asks, what if Caracas wasn't chosen because it was safe, but because it was expendable?
That is the uncomfortable truth at the bottom of all this.
Unpack that for us. What does that mean, expendable?
When we talk about low signal environments and priced-in outrage, what we're really saying is that the planners looked at this city and decided that if they broke it, it didn't really matter.
Because it was already broken.
Or because the people who live there and the stability of that region were considered less valuable than the mission objective. It's an expendability calculation. If you do a raid in Paris and it goes wrong, the consequences are astronomical. If you do it in a place the world has already written off, the calculation changes.
The city is just a disposable cup. Use it, crush it, throw it away.
It is incredibly cynical. But we have to be honest. This is how power operates when it thinks it has cover. It follows the path of least resistance. And often, that path goes through the places the world has stopped caring about.
So pulling this all together, we started with why Caracas? And it wasn't about the map at all, was it?
No. It was about finding a place where the noise was loud enough to hide in, where the world was bored enough not to look too closely, and where the consequences of failure were seen as manageable.
That's the synthesis. The choice of Caracas reveals the psychology of the planners. It shows their risk tolerance, their desperation for speed, and their assumption that the fallout wouldn't really matter.
The city is just the stage. But the play tells you everything about the director.
And you know, the source makes a point that I think is the perfect setup for where you'd go next. We spent this whole time on the where, but the text says the real key is the when.
Right, the clock.
We touched on urgency, but this goes deeper.
It does. Once that clock starts ticking, bad options start looking acceptable. When you're out of time, you start looking for the safe bet, and you start looking for the possible bet.
We like to think these decisions are made with cool, calm logic.
But often, they're made with one eye on the clock and the other on the least worst option, probably fueled by too much coffee and not enough sleep. And that's where the real danger is.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with one final thought from the source that really stuck with me. When power operates in the shadows, it doesn't look for the perfect stage. It looks for the stage where no one will care if the lights go out.
That is a powerful image.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge for all of us is to look at the map today. Look at the world right now. Where are those places today?
Exactly. What are the low signal environments of 2026? Where are the places we've collectively decided are boring? Because history tells us that is exactly where things are probably happening.
If you want to know where the next Operation Caracas might be, don't look at the front page. Look at the stories we've stopped reading. Look for the noise.
That is all for this deep dive. As always, thank you for listening. We will catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.